Okay, I think it was a newer person, commented on my channel and asked me to explain my near-death experience. And I do have a video out about that, but it's a couple of years old. And I was outside and the wind is really loud and you can't understand some of it, so I thought I'd go ahead and do it again. So, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how I died because, like I've said before, that's the least important part of this story, but we'll do a short version. And basically I worked too much with too much stress, and I got a duodenal ulcer, which is an ulcer in small intestines, and I was unable to afford medical care. I live in the United States, and yeah, I know that doesn't make any sense considering I worked around so many doctors, but in hospitals, but that's the way it is here. So I couldn't afford the medicine even if I could afford to get to the doctor. So I just kept working. Single mom, didn't have a choice. So I kept working through it. Dumb move, but you do what you have to do. So eventually, of course, caught up with me, and I got a case of pneumonia. And the pneumonia was one of the superbugs because I did work in a hospital. So and I fought that off for quite some time. I was able to get a sputum specimen and find out what bug it was, and it was actually 3. So, yeah, that was bad news. But it didn't matter. I couldn't afford to stop working anyway because I was the only caregiver, moneymaker. So I just kept on going and going until basically what happened is the ulcer in my small intestines ruptured, which means it opened up and it made a hole between my intestines and my abdominal cavity. And when you have pneumonia of any kind, there is a certain amount of drainage that goes down into your stomach no matter what. And that drainage came from my lungs where it had those superbugs, and it went down into my stomach, and it went through that hole in my ulcer, shot out into my peritoneal cavity, and sent me into septic shock. Very similar to what would happen if somebody's appendix breaks and all of that bad stuff goes out into the peritoneal cavity and they can get sick very fast. They found me on the floor next to my bed with my eyes rolled up in my head, and I was in full-blown septic shock at that point. They rushed me to the hospital and saved my life. Now, when we have septic shock on somebody in the hospital, it's tricky to keep them alive. And surprisingly, septic shock, especially with pneumonia, does kill quite a few people. It's not as uncommon as you would think. But so it's quite surprising that nobody really knows how long I was out on the floor. But it was quite surprising that I lived to tell this tale. Now, I've actually read my chart, and trust me, there is no reason in the world why I should be alive. They did tell my kids I was in a coma for almost a month. They did tell my kids many nights that I wouldn't make it through the night. Can you imagine what that was like for those kids? I mean, I was having a great time. I was dead and then in a coma. I was in good shape. But my kids were sitting there at my bedside thinking that I was going to be dead by the next morning, and then I would rally. They wouldn't know how. I'd be alive for the day, and then I would start to fail at the night, and they'd tell them that I was going to die this night, and that happened over and over and over again. Can you imagine how traumatic that would have been? Yeah, that was. Okay, moving on. So, let's start the story with, I don't remember. I knew that I was sick, and I had given my daughter instructions because I knew the potential and what could happen. I knew about the ulcer, I knew about the pneumonia, I knew about the superbugs. I knew I was in bad shape, and I told her if such and such happens, then be sure and tell the doctors. the information that I'd given her, which she did, but she was, I think, 17. So, of course, the doctors ignored her until they did all their tests, and then they came back in and basically told her what she had told them. Yeah, don't you love docs? So, anyway, I don't remember, falling out on the floor. I don't remember the ambulance ride to the hospital or any of that stuff. But what I do remember is I remember being in the emergency room and floating above my body and looking down. I wasn't afraid. By this point, and if you've listened to any of my other videos, if you haven't, go over to my trauma video, because I'm not going to go into that stuff here. But after all of that, plus to this point, yeah, I was not afraid at all. I was relieved because I had come out of my body. There was no pain. There was no fear. There was freedom. Yeah, I was feeling pretty good, even though I was sitting kind of, and I'm going to use terms. I'm going to use 3D, 4D terms, even though this isn't really accurate, because there is no up or down. There is no pullback or any of that stuff, but I'm going to use those terms because we don't have any other terms. So it would have been the equivalent of being like on the ceiling, looking down. And I stayed there for a while because I'm a nurse, and I'm an ER ICU nurse, or was, retired. And I was curious to see how they would handle the situation. I knew it was my body down there. It didn't scare me. It didn't worry me at all. And they did a very good job, very impressed. And yeah, I heard everything they said, every single bit of it, and they were very professional, worked well together, and although they were very nervous about the situation, they did a really, really good job. So, yeah, I'm very thankful to them for that, I guess, as you all know. Okay, so after I floated up there and I kind of got bored, then I pulled back, and I'm going to say not up, but back more, and just in case if you've never heard my other videos, I'm going to insert my rose analogy here, and then I'll continue on with the near-death experience. And I want you to think about that you go into a garden and you go in front of a rose bush and you find the most beautiful red rose. And you sit down in front of that red rose and you get your nose really, really close to it, about an inch away. And you open your eyes and you concentrate. You start looking at the texture on each petal and how each petal is shaped, and the stamen and the little pollen that's on it. And you really focus and you're just really watching and looking at everything about this rose, smelling it, putting your nose close to it and feeling it. So much so that the rest of the bush disappears, that it just goes black around the edges, and most of you, I think, have probably done this. And so it's not that the rose bush, the garden, the city, the country, the planet, the solar system, the universe, or the multiverse no longer exists anymore. It's just that you're so focused on the rose that you forgot about it, all the rest of it. Okay, well, when you die, you start pulling back, and all of a sudden you see the rose, and then you see other roses, and then you go, oh, that's cool, and maybe you'll pull back enough to see the whole bush, and maybe you'll pull back enough to see the whole garden, and maybe you'll pull back enough to see the town, the state, the country, the planet, the solar system, the universe, the multiverse, and beyond, outside of creation. Whoop. Outside of the creation. Okay? Well, I pulled way, way back. way, way back. So, but I did it sort of in stages, because I was like pulling back of interest. Now, I did not see a tunnel. I did not have any angelic beings or Jesus or my grandparents or anybody meet me. Okay? At this point. Well, I didn't at all. Now, since then, I have found or remembered that the tunnel thing is for reincarnated beings, and if you're incarnated and you're not reincarnating back on the same planet, then you don't see that tunnel. And I did not see that tunnel. at all. And then I'd pull back a little bit more, and I would say that I saw people dying. People dying. And my father is a Church of Christ preacher. That's pretty hardline, monotheistic, Jehovah God religion. And for a great portion of my life, I believed all of it, too. Studied it a great deal. As I was growing up, actually, religion was kind of a safe place for me because I had such a bad childhood. So it was a very comforting place for me to be. So, and I used to talk to God, Jehovah God, all the time. In my head, all the time, all the time. So I think probably that's why I paused enough to watch people dying. Now, from a standpoint of where did I pull back to? Oh, about the whole planet. Because I could see everybody dying. And there was a lot of dying going on. But the part that was interesting to me, and that I focused on, I think, the most interesting, were the people that went to heavens or hells. Of course, I quickly figured out at this point watching them that these people went where they believed they were going to go. Or where you created. If you die, you're going to go where you create, you go. Okay? Where you believe you're going. And the ones that were fascinating to me were the people that went to heaven and hell. Because, of course, that was my history at that point. So, and I saw all these people going to hell. And all these people would go to hell and they were horrible. I mean, just read the Bible just like that, only worse. And they were full of people. Full of people. Gnashing of teeth, wailing, horrifying creations these people did. That they went to. Okay? And they very quickly, even though there's no such thing as time, they very quickly figured out that they had created that experience and that they didn't like it there and they left. But the surprising thing to me was that they didn't leave as fast as the people who went to heavens that they had created. Now, if you read the Bible's full of descriptions of streets of gold and these big mansions and all of these ideals that people think of whenever they think of heaven. And there's choruses of angels and all of this I saw. All different versions of that. Very similar, kind of like the hell versions, very similar. But the interesting thing to me is, and these places were beautiful. There was no nature in them at all, but they were beautiful. I mean, they had all kinds of just silver, gold, diamondy stuff, clouds, and usually there were occasionally cherubs or angels, but mostly it was far off singing, angelic choirs. Occasionally they would see a far off Jehovah God type person sitting up in the clouds on a throne. Very, very occasionally they would be walking the streets with, say, Mary or Jesus. But usually, on the high percentage of cases, these people would be walking down the streets totally alone. And I thought that was fascinating. Because, you know how many people go through life and going, oh man, they're going to hell. They are going to hell. And you, one right after the other, people say it all the time. Watch the news. Oh, those guys are going to hell. But how many times do you hear people say, well, that person's really going to heaven? I know they are. And I don't mean when they die. And I don't mean babies and children. I mean regular adult folk. How many people, until they're dead, do people say, yep, that person, they're going right to heaven. They're so awesome. They are just straight line into heaven. Well, that is played out in the creations of that people have made. Because they think that God's going to sort it out. And that God has this stuff prepared, and God's the one that chooses who goes to heaven. Well, except they're God, and they are the ones that created heaven. They're the ones that created their hells, and they filled up the hells for the people who went to hell. But the ones that went to heaven, they didn't fill up heaven. They thought God was going to take care of that. So there was nobody there. They were walking down the streets, frequently very alone. Not only that, but they thought, you know, in hell there were things that are described. You know, there's torturing and demons and the devil and horrible things are going on. Long lists. But there's really not a whole lot of description about what people will be doing in heaven. So the people that created heavens, they just pretty much thought that God was going to handle the curriculum up there. Except they are God. They created it. So there was no curriculum. So not only was no one there, but they had nothing to do. Nothing. So very, very, very quickly, they figured out that they had created the heavens, and they took off and went on. Then there's the third area and these are large groupings, of course. There were infinite number of other options as well, but these are the main ones, categories. And other religions, they have their idea, like Valhalla. Valhalla was big. Actually, people stayed there a little bit longer, really. But probably the group that had the most people that stayed the longest were the people who are like my mother. My mother totally believed. I was born in Wyoming, United States, Wyoming, and she absolutely believed that heaven for her was going to be like Wyoming, the best parts of Wyoming. So anybody who had created their version of, okay, heaven is some kind of natural place, a beach, mountainside, next to a lake, any of those kind of people, they usually were just relaxed, laid back, and they would usually stick around the longest. Okay? So I watched those for a while, and that was interesting, but then I got bored with that. So I kind of pulled back a little bit further. And right about here was where, and I'm going to say, where everybody else talks about their life review, I'm going to insert this, because I did not perceive it as my life review like I've seen or heard most people describing it. I saw it more as, here was my life in total. And this is how it interacted with everyone all the time. And I saw it all at once. And from that perspective, it was wonderful and beautiful and perfect. Again, let me refer you to my trauma video. And let me say that the traumas were before I died. I still looked at the total picture of my life and saw it as absolutely phenomenally beautiful in every single way. That's how I perceived it. There was nothing I did wrong. There was nothing that anybody else did wrong. There was nothing I needed to go back and fix or do right or do better at all. I did not get that feeling. I did not get that impression at all. Now, there are people that have near-death experiences that have a different kind of review, and they feel a very strong desire, need to either reincarnate, to do things differently, or to go back into body and do things differently. But that's a different kind of game. It's a different purpose than what I did. Okay? All NDEs are perfect the way they were done for that person, but everybody has their reason for doing NDEs. We all do it to ourselves for a reason. I personally saw my life and everyone else's life as perfect and incredibly intricate and beautiful. I also saw at this point that the most minute changes, simply one step to the right or the left, and it changed the whole picture. At this time, I think I started to be able to see infinite possibilities. It was at this time that I stepped outside of the time-space illusion during this process. And I remember thinking at the time, I remember this very vividly, I remember thinking, oh yeah, I remember now. And then that was followed with, oh my gosh, I can't believe that really worked. Because before, then I remembered making the decision to go down to Earth and be in time-space, and I was hanging out with my pub friends, my friends, and everybody would, like, that had never been in time-space before, they went, that I would never fall for that. No, Would never fall for that time-space illusion. And I would never forget the creator God that I am. That amnesia thing, I just don't think that would work for me, personally. I don't think that'd work. And getting all caught up in this whole religion and control of money and power and, killing, destroying the planet and everything on it. Oh, no. No, that would never work. No, I would never fall for that. Yeah. I remember going, oh my gosh, it worked. Not only did it work, but it massively worked. And I remember turning around to my friends and going, you guys would not believe what that was like. Okay, now I am making it into kind of a movie because by that time I was out of time-space. Again, let me refer to my disclaimer on language used to 3D, 4D people to describe now-time, unity consciousness outside of the time-space illusion. I will be using words that are accurate, not at all, but they're the closest thing that I can use to describe a place that you can't even fathom. Okay? So then what I did was I realized that, okay, I'm outside of time-space, and I just got excited. And I just started flying hither and thither and zooming in. And I remember zooming into a molecule in a fingernail of somebody's fingernail and experiencing, feeling, seeing, reading the experience that molecule had for its entire existence. Everything from pulling back and seeing everything from the beginning to the end of 3D Earth Gaia, as I call her, even though that's really not her name either, but that's closer than Earth. And so all the way up to the creation of all that you know of as in this particular creation. And so I saw how that all was done. I hung out with the creator of all it is. I very quickly, and I know people make a big deal about this, like they merged with Source. I just really didn't find merging with Source to be that big a deal, nor was it hard. Yeah, I did. Came back out of it, went cool, out. Zoomed around all over the place. But I did have a fascination, a very big fascination after the whole heaven health thing, that I wanted to talk to Jehovah God. This is a dude I'd been talking to good portion of my life. So I went, I want to talk to Jehovah God. Bingo, bango. I was right in front of him. Now, this is a dude that was sitting on a throne looking very much like the pictures that you see with the old white guy, long white beard and hair. And the interesting thing was on this one, though, that he kept flashing back and forth between, I would say, Middle Eastern skin color, dark eyes kind of a look, to Caucasian white old man with white hair. Interesting. Kept flashing back and forth, back and forth. Very interesting, depending upon my question. Well, whenever I found him, of course, I'd already been all the way outside the creation and beyond to many other creations and back to Source and back down and out and around and all over the place. So when I asked to see him, I knew exactly where he was, and he is very definitely in the higher 2/3 vibration of 4D. And so we had a talk, and he was not amused that I knew who he was, and he absolutely believes that he is the creator of all things, and he just couldn't believe that I was going, no, you're not. No, you're not. So then I could read the vibrations of where his energy came from and how all of his energy worked, and I will refer you to my Jehovah video for all of that information. Okay? So I had my exchange with him, and then I went, done. So I ran over and had a chit-chat with Satan. Again, refer to that video. And then when I was done with that, went and had more interaction with my friends, and I zoomed around the universe, outside the creation and beyond. There was, I would say, about the time I went out of the time-space illusion and into now time, there was absolutely, I will agree, incredible amount of light, more colors than you can possibly imagine. You've heard all this before. A love that you can't even fathom. Refer to my love videos, because I'm not going to go into that here either, but because I don't want to. Has some sensitive speaking on there, depending upon who's watching this. Just refer to those videos as far as how that love felt. Okay? At this point along here, I knew my whole story, how I had come to be here, why I came here, my relationships with beings, and all of that is extremely complex and would take a lot longer than what I have here to explain. But I did tap into the now into unity consciousness, into source, into the all-knowingness, and had access to all things at one time. Okay?